What's up, YouTube? It's time for a review of the new All That Remains record Madness, out this past Friday, April 28th. God, my notes on this thing are so fucking long, and I've got my thoughts condensed here, but there was just so much to think about when it comes to this band and their career arc and my evolving relationship with it. About 10, 11 years ago, All That Remains were a key gateway band for me into the world of metal, as I imagine they were for shit ton of other people. The way they infused these super commercial hard rock choruses into the metalcore sound, which made them, for better or for worse, one of the most recognizable purveyors of the whole good cop, bad cop metalcore sound, where these mainstream metal bands would basically scream during the verse, big melodic hook during the chorus, scream for the breakdown, lather, rinse, repeat. Killswitch Engage, As the Lay Dying, early Avenged Sevenfold, early Atreyu. These are all bands that, along with All That Remains, saw great success with that good cop, bad cop formula. It had just enough edge for their young, angsty fans, but it wasn't as impenetrable as extreme metal was, so it sold. And All That Remains' third record, The Fall of Ideals, in 2006, was widely acknowledged as one of the commercial, if not artistic, peaks of the style. That album was huge for me getting into metal, although my favorite All That Remains record would actually come 4 years later with their fifth record for We Are Many. But the other reason All That Remains was so important to me as a young kid was their lead guitar player, Ollie Herbert, who just had an enormous influence on my playing. I learned so much from studying Ollie, and not just studying his technique, but his articulation, and the way he would just meticulously compose his solos to make every single note count. He's one of the players who most shaped my playing out of anybody. And if you go back into this channel's history to when I used to do a bunch of guitar covers, you'll see proof of that, because there's not a single artist that I covered more than All That Remains. I did the Chiron solo, which I'll put in the suggestion cards on this video, since YouTube's fucking getting rid of annotations. Literally today. Today's May 2nd. This is the day that annotations are gone. So that's a sad day, because I used to love to fucking annotate these videos. But I also did the Undone solo. I did Become the Catalyst, This Calling. So definitely look back into this channel's history if you're curious about that. But Ollie was a huge influence on my playing. Point made. Unfortunately for All That Remains, though, their career has been kind of on the down in the eyes of many since 2010, with their last two records being received not so positively. A lot of the backlash just has to do with the band pushing their sound into increasingly commercial territory, bringing in co-writers for ballads like What If I Was Nothing, and elsewhere just making cringy pop metal. Personally, I don't give a fuck how commercial something is. Anyone who watches this channel knows that that is not an issue for me. So that's not what bothered me. What bothered me with these two records was just how uninspired they sounded. And here's my hypothesis as to why. I think the band has become sort of boxed in by their specific lane of good cop, bad cop metalcore, and they've just been feeling like prisoners within their own sound because they basically ran out of things to say within it. And even worse, since they've always had that double-edged sword of being an accessible band with hits, all they felt like they could really do was just push that mainstream accessibility forward within those narrow stylistic dimensions. So they did that by either singing over all the heavy parts in a song like This Probably Won't End Well, which, spoiler alert, did not end well, or, writing a ballad or two. That's pretty much all they could do if they were gonna just be more accessible but still be in that same lane. So that's what I think happened. And having said that, this new album is just like a deep sigh of relief, because they finally just said fuck it and made what's practically a hard rock record with a few metal tunes on it. They sound so free on this album. And let's be honest, All That Remains has never been a brutal band anyway. They've always had this awkward push and pull between the metal thing and the cringy radio rock thing, so why not give into one side and see how it plays out? However, just because I'm relieved for the band that they had the courage to just push things in this new direction doesn't mean I enjoy what I'm hearing. The production on this record... This album was produced by a guy named Howard Benson, whose resume includes Hoobastank, Three Doors Down, Scott Stapp, Flyleaf, that last In Flames record that I reviewed on this channel and didn't like, partly due to the production. The way he crafted this album to sound just rubs me wrong. The distorted guitars in particular are just put through this fucking processing plant. They sound so overproduced, they have a complete lack of edge, They sound like the distorted guitars on a 3 Days Grace or a Skillet record, which are both resume bullets for Howard Benson. Just listen to the riffs in a song like Open Grave. They just sound so weak. There's no crunch. It's as if you were to like turn a half stack all the way up, but then put a glass wall between you and the amp. One specific part where the flaccid guitars bother me the most is the breakdown on the song Nothing I Can Do, because Phil Labonte lets out this pretty vicious, powerful scream to lead into the section, and then you're greeted with these like really weak, pathetic sounding guitars. Like, how is that supposed to work? They don't match the vocal energy at all. Same could be said for the title track. There's just not enough power or balls behind the guitar tone to make these riffs come to life. Another thing that drives me nuts is drummer Jason Costa's kick drums. Now, All That Remains has always had obnoxiously loud kick drums. Like, I listened back to Overcome and For We Are Many. I'm just like, how did this not bother me at the time? But at least on those records, the kicks themselves were much thicker and more muscular, whereas the kicks on Madness are just super clicky and annoying. Like at the very beginning of the opening track, Safe House, the kicks are so loud and so thin that it's distracting. It's like a bunch of tiny mice are nibbling at my brain, especially when I listen with studio headphones. And don't even get me started on those like electronic drums at the beginning of River City. That's a whole other issue. Also, as I discussed in my In Flames review, when are producers going to stop pushing these corny crowd sing-alongs? Yes, it worked for Bring Me the Horizon. Now everyone wants a piece, but you're all getting sloppy seconds. These things show up on the song Louder, and it just has always bothered me because it feels like a cheap way to kind of force the issue when the chorus by itself isn't anthemic enough. Madness is also chock full of these added electronic sound effects, which they can be cool if they're used for the right reasons. Like they're sick on the song Safe House, which is a song that's so clearly aiming for this specific, creepy, eerie mood, and the effects that are in the song really contribute to that nicely. But a lot of the time, like in the post-chorus section of Nothing I Can Do, or in the title track, which is just riddled with them, these tacked-on sound effects feel more like space fillers than anything else. Because I know as a musician myself, sometimes you'll be in the studio and a part will just feel a little naked or like it's kind of missing something or it's not full or big enough. So you start experimenting with adding keys. Maybe you'll comb through the ambient presets on whatever software your producer has. But the problem is that's a bit of a slippery slope. Because you do that too often, that's how you wind up with an album with no riffs. And I'm not saying that's the case with this record, but songs like the title track are an example of where they're leaning on these embellishments a bit too much. But if I had to pick the one major downfall of this album, it's the fucking ballads. Holy fuck. Look, I grew up on 80s hard rock. There's nothing I love more than a good cheesy ballad. But the ones on here, Far From Home, Back to You, If I'm Honest, it's not even like it's the same band. They sound like a fucking pop punk band or something. It is fucking pathetic. I mean, these songs are so shameless that I can't get mad at their existence, but I can get mad at how bad they are. Every time I listen to either Back to You or Far From Home especially, I either start giggling a little bit or just start feeling nauseous. There's just nothing I can say in defense of these songs. Whiny vocals, 4-chord pop progressions, lyrics like, some days are like the ocean, they never seem to end. It's fucking horrific. But even if these were good ballads, I'd still have an issue with the latter half of this album because it has what I like to call ballad syndrome, where a rock or metal band has too many slow songs too close together in a track list, because that's really the ultimate momentum killer on a rock record. And if you count the Garth Brooks cover, 4 out of the last 7 songs on this album are slow songs. So even if these were good songs, that's too much stop-start as a listener. If I were All That Remains, I would have wrote out this hard rock sound for the majority of the record, and then maybe thrown in 1 or 2 ballads for good measure. My pick probably would have been River City, which is pretty catchy, and even though Phil Labonte sounds real clunky in that lower register in the beginning, the chorus does have some awesome layering of clean and electric guitars. That clean guitar line especially is as melodic as the vocals are. And all this is a shame because there's a few songs on here that I really like. My favorite by far is the most metal one, Trust and Believe, which coming out of Far From Home is such a shock because you come out of this ballad and the band just launch into these harmonized pivot riffs that could have easily been on This Darkened Heart. It cracked me up the first time I heard that transition. The guitars in the chorus are super catchy, and Labonte's doing that awesome vocal layering thing that he started doing on Overcome, where he sings and screams at the same time, and the screams are just way lower in the mix to add texture. It's sick. Never Sorry, love that tune. That quirky little pseudo dance intro is an example of a stylistic experimentation going well. It almost reminds me a bit of like Gorillaz' Demon Days, but that's probably just because Gorillaz are at the forefront of my mind right now because they just dropped their album. The chorus to Never Sorry is a clear reach for a sing-along, but it works because it just grooves so hard, and I really enjoy that tense chord progression, even though it's a progression that's used a lot. I also really like Safe House once I adjust to that kick drum sound. It's fucking heavy. Sonically, it's appropriately creepy given the interesting lyrics, which to me read like this guy luring a criminal or a thief into his house so he can then murder him. Almost like a self-defense serial killer or something. At least that's my interpretation. There's probably something else to it. And what I also enjoy about Safe House is that the lyrics to the hook on paper really read like hip-hop lyrics, which just adds a fun new element for me listening. I could see this one being a devastating live opener for sure. And you know, Ollie Herbert's lead guitar playing is always a positive. I love his phrasing on the Nothing I Can Do solo. I think the solo to the song Louder has some real memorable motifs. He's the fucking best. His playing has been a constant joy to listen to on every album. It's also awesome how their new bassist Aaron Patrick is so high up in this mix, and he gets off some great bass lines, like on the second verse of the song Nothing I Can Do. The only spot where I wish he was mixed back a bit is the song Trust and Believe, because the bass is so high up that it starts to poke holes through some of the chunkier riffing on that song. So this album isn't the complete disaster that I'm sure a lot of people are going to try to make it out to be, given that it's a further departure into commercial hard rock, so people are going to bash it just on that basis. Honestly, I'd prefer that they try this and miss, as opposed to just continuing to make uninspired music within that metalcore box. Now, is this album for me? Nope. And I gotta admit, the thought of playing this album for an All That Remains fan in like 2004 is a hell of a visual. But I gotta say this. One thing that I think people aren't really taking into account when they just bash new All That Remains music is their own personal changing tastes. Like, I first heard The Fall of Ideals when I was in middle school. When I listen to that album now, I gotta be honest, you can get mad at me all you want. It comes off kind of cheesy to me. I don't really like it anymore. That album and Overcome and even For We Are Many haven't really aged all that well. So who knows? If Madness came out when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I bet I would have loved it. So you just got to keep your own personal evolution in mind when you listen to new music from bands that you liked over a decade ago. As for my parting thoughts, I would encourage All That Remains to keep going in this direction. They've got nothing to lose, and with some of these songs, they're onto something. To my ears, they just need to drop the ballads, write some more engaging lyrics like they started to do on Safe House, and they need production that's more organic and has more of a raw energy to it. So we'll see. Didn't enjoy this album, but I'm definitely rooting for them, and I was definitely glad to see them finally break out of that stylistic box. Madness gets a 4 out of 10 from me. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, or shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music, and I'll see you guys soon.